name is Cassie Bergman, and today I'm going to be talking about obesity and body image in the LGBTQ community, a queer perspective. As a whole, the Western world is characteristically preoccupied with body image. We carry a great deal of body shame and we moralize obesity. Such a culture feeds negative perceptions of our bodies and an obsession over losing weight. According to the National Eating Disorder Association, gay men are thought to represent about 5% of the total male population, but among men who have eating disorders, 42% identify as gay. This alarmingly disproportionate statistic should compel us to ask, what's going on here? And what confounding factors are at play in the queer community that affect body image? To begin, some stresses of being queer include, but are not limited to, coming out, internalized negative beliefs about oneself, social acceptance, and experiences of violence, discrimination, or harassment. This, in turn, can lead to depression or other mental illnesses, self-esteem issues, or disordered eating. Consequently, this can lead to changes in weight and changes in one's perceived body image. Within the queer community, there's been a distinction drawn between the way that queer men and queer women interact and think about their bodies. It's generally thought that queer women face less body dissatisfaction than queer men, but to remain true to the study of feminist and queer studies, I'm going to pull up a few quotes from both queer men and queer women that provide differing perspectives on such topics. So this one quote from a queer man touches on how his changing perceptions of his sexuality impacted his relationship with food and how he used food to kind of mask any thoughts about queerness. This quote brings into picture the correlation of fatness and feminization. That is, the fatter a man is, the more feminine he is considered. And this man describes palpably soft and round, either lean and lithe, or robustly muscular features. A lot of queer women echo such sentiments and claim that lesbians don't face the same kind of moralizing and punitive position as those in the general queer culture, and that it's definitely more of a gay man issue, and overall that lesbians are more forgiving when it comes to body physical appearance and are more compassionate in that regard. I really liked this one quote. I feel better about my fatness as a lesbian. Freedom, joy, fear, and at-homeness characterize my lesbian body experience. I live in, make love with, and am loved in my body as an organic whole. However, not all queer women feel this way. This alternative account suggests that as a queer fat woman, she carries triple the burden of body shame. And recent research actually echoes her sentiment. Watson et al. Did a study in 2017 in which they surveyed over 26,000 youth in Massachusetts to investigate trends in purging, fasting, and using diet pills to lose or control weight for heterosexual and sexual minority youth. And the findings of this study suggest that sexual minority youth are at a much higher risk for disordered eating compared to their heterosexual counterparts, and suggest that this disparity is not improving. And disordered eating is telling for the way that that individuals think about their body and perceive their body image. But another important takeaway is that where we see improvement among sexual minorities, we only see this improvement in the male population and not in the female population. So perhaps this is because body image is mostly a gendered issue, but with a greater prevalence of harmful weight control among queer women, it can't just be a result of gender. And perhaps queer women are, as stated previously, carrying a triple burden. A further issue is that treatment and support may not be very accessible for LGBTQ plus persons, and this includes lack of availability of culturally competent treatment, family friend support, just an encouraging positive body talk, and also a lack of safe spaces in mental health care. Empirical research on the transgender community is sparse, unfortunately, but not surprisingly. And historically, most research has dealt with case studies, but an important study in 2017 by Watson found that transgender students were twice as likely to use diet pills in the past month than their heterosexual and lesbian, gay, and bisexual counterparts. And additionally, about half of 14 to 18-year-old transgender youth engaged in binge eating, fasting, pill use, laxatives, or vomiting in order to lose weight. So queer. Throughout this presentation, I've been using the word queer as kind of an umbrella term for LGBTQ and to refer to sexuality. But one time in a department store, my mom held up a t-shirt and asked me, "Does this shirt look queer?" Aside from highlighting a generational gap in language, I think this anecdote also underscores the immense marginalization faced by LGBTQ people. Because what my mom really meant by "does this shirt look queer" was, does this shirt look weird, strange, odd, unusual, freakish, peculiar, unnatural? And what ties all these adjectives together is the idea of being different or othered. And LGBTQ people are, without a doubt, othered in society, in that their sexual or gender orientation does not match that of the norm. Similarly, fat or obese people are othered in this way. Just the word overweight suggests that there is some ideal standard of weight that we should all be striving for. So back to this flowchart about the stresses of being queer and the implications that it has for weight fluctuation and changes in perceived body image. And also with the notion that queer is synonymous with being othered, we can now talk about the stresses of being othered. Furthermore, those who are considered fat or obese or overweight are also othered in a sense. And so we can talk about stresses of being fat as parallel to the stresses of being queer. And I think coming out as fat, an idea that Atkins discusses in her book, I think highlights this idea nicely, in which she draws the parallel between coming out as fat and coming out as lesbian. And in both instances, you contradict the norm, you challenge stereotypes, and you have to come out to each person anew. And most interestingly, I thought, was that it was thought to be considered embarrassing to speak about. So in the same way that if you farted in a room and you verbally declared that you just farted, you were supposed to feel this sense of like shame and embarrassment, and the same is true with outwardly declaring that you are fat or you are queer. Shame and embarrassment is supposed to accompany that. And so now I think we can talk about the stresses of being queer and fat as they relate to one another, the overlaps of the two, and how the two, I think, are inextricably linked, which is why I think it's appropriate to complete this flowchart with an arrow in that gains in weight, changes in perceived body image can lead to even more stresses that accompany being queer, being fat. And I think that it is generally a disservice to ignore conversations about body image when discussing queerness, and likewise, it's a disservice to discuss body image without examining how queerness plays a role. To conclude, body image and obesity are very complex issues. Thus, a solution or a concluding remark seems somewhat out of reach. But I think a nice place to start is to spark dialogue about these issues, and notably a dialogue that includes and acknowledges the way that marginalized identities may be similarly and differently impacted, no matter how queer it may feel. Thank you.